Welcome to the spectacular Château de Purnon, an 18th century jewel in the heart of the French countryside. When we found her in 2020, she lay in peril. Share our journey as we battle to save her, uncovering her secrets, sharing her past, and working hard to secure her future. Even before the chateau, the lands here at Purnon bore witness to great events and notorious personalities. A former chateau built on this site was the scene of a savage battle during the 100 Years' War, and one of the domain's former owners was the prime suspect in the poisoning of Princess Henrietta, the wife of the Duc d'Orléans, the brother of France's greatest king, Louis XIV. But these are stories for another day. Today, join us as we share with you some of the history of the current Château de Purnon. We thought we'd start right here, high up on the scaffolding currently encasing the chateau facades, and show you these epic stone blasons or coats of arms. They belong to the chateau's first owners, the Marquis Antoine Charles Achard de la Haye and his wife Bénigne Modeste de la Motte Barricay. They purchased the land here for Purnon in 1771 and constructed the chateau between 1779 and 1788. They used the stone from a chateau in the nearby village of Brisay. The construction of the chateau and its two enormous communs were completed just the year before the outbreak of the French Revolution. It wasn't a good time to be an aristocrat here in France.
The outbreak of revolution would have been a seismic event for the people living here at Château de Purnon. It was an event of global significance, and even more than 200 years later, historians are still debating its causes and its consequences. So we've come here to a small dressing room on the ground floor. And if we look at this fascinating wallpaper, we see here the Roman god Mercury, the god of commerce. So this wallpaper, which dates from the chateau's construction, is celebrating a commercial agreement between England and France, the Eden Agreement, signed in 1786. In the end, it was a commercial agreement that was so disadvantageous to France that it was one of the things which helped feed the economic crisis which ultimately led to revolution. This wallpaper is a fascinating testament to that era. This room on the chateau's first floor is home to these incredible hand-block printed 18th century French wallpapers. They date from the chateau's construction, and with the help of French wallpaper experts, we've been able to ascertain that they were manufactured by the Revillon workshop in Faubourg Saint-Antoine in Paris. They're the last surviving examples of them anywhere in France, so they're incredibly precious. Now, the Revillon workshop was the scene of terrible riots at the outbreak of the French Revolution. Workers clashed with soldiers, hundreds of people were killed. They were amongst the bloodiest days of the French Revolution. And there is no doubt that the exquisite wallpapers that we can see behind us would have been crafted by people who bore witness and perhaps participated in those terrible events. bust of Louis XVIII, one of France's least celebrated kings. What's it doing here at Château de Purnon? Well, the Marquis Antoine Charles Achard de la Haye had been a page to the Duc d'Orléans, the brother of Louis XV. Louis XVI was dragged away by a revolutionary mob to the guillotine. The Achard de la Hayes were fervent monarchists. The Marquis's eldest son, Auguste, was killed by a revolutionary mob in Lyon. And the Marquis himself fought alongside the royalist armies trying to overturn the revolution. After the abdication of Napoleon Bonaparte in 1815, the restoration of Louis XVIII to the throne of France would have been a great event for the Achard de la Hayes. They would have believed that this reaffirmed the traditional social order. And that's why we found this bust on the second floor here at Purnon.
These monumental gates behind me gaze out over the picturesque Gavol forest, and at one point in time were the main entrance to the chateau. They were constructed in 1812 when the Marquis returned from fighting, and actually the date is marked right at the top here. With the tragic death of the Marquis's eldest son during the Revolution, the death of the Marquis himself in 1816 meant that the chateau passed on to his only surviving child, Edouard. Edouard would fund the construction of the church here in the village, the Église Saint-Hilaire, and he also went on to be the mayor here for many years.
So we're here in Château de Purnon's basement. This room would have housed the chateau's original kitchen. In 1844, Edouard Achard de la Haye passed away, and so the chateau passed to his daughter, Catherine Antoinette. Now in 1831, she'd married the Baron de Goyon. And look what we found, this copperware cooking set. And it includes this lid, which is inscribed with the de Goyon name. Perhaps it was a wedding gift. Now the Baron de Goyon passed away quite suddenly in 1851, and now the chateau passed to his daughter, Pauline de Goyon. Now Pauline de Goyon had in 1850, here at Purnon's chapel, married the Comte de Montesquieu-Fezensac. Now the Comte came from a grand French family. His grandfather had fought alongside Napoleon and had been gravely wounded at the Battle of Waterloo. One of his ancestors, his name is inscribed on the Arc de Triomphe, and he was a member of the Académie Française. And another of his ancestors, d'Artagnan Baz de Castlemore, was the real-life person upon whom Alexandre Dumas based the central character in The Three Musketeers. What a great French family!
However, by the 1890s, Purnon was over 100 years old, and the chateau and the surrounding buildings were outdated and in decay. Thankfully, in 1893, the chateau was purchased by Daniel de Rochequerry, who at the time was the Comte, and over time he would become the Marquis de Rochequerry. His purchase of the chateau ushered in an era of new investment and modernisation. Electricity was added, the roof was realigned so that this zinc guttering system could be installed and provide a modern system of diverting water. These huge heaters were installed in the basement, and we can still see the ducts through which the warm air was delivered to the chateau's ground rooms. He installed the Éolienne Bollée, a wind turbine, and here on the second floor, a system for summoning domestic staff. At this time, it would have been very modern, but who was his wife? Madame la Comtesse.
So to answer that question, we've come here to the Grand Salon, one of the most opulent rooms in the chateau. And if we come over here to this fireplace, we discover this amazing iron fireback. Just like the blason on the chateau's facade, it contains two coats of arms, testifying to a dynastic marriage. We can see the coat of arms of the Roche-Query family, and next to it, the Wartime family. And the Wartime family own this extraordinary chateau just a short drive away from Purnon. Today, it's the property of the French state. Now, Daniel de Roche-Query married Elizabeth de Wartime in 1887, and together they had 4 children. But sadly, Elizabeth passed away in 1901, and the following year, here at the chapel at Château de Purnon, Daniel de Roche-Query married her younger sister Yvonne. In that era, this wasn't an unusual occurrence, but we can't be sure which of these 2 marriages this iron fireback attests to. It was the Belle Epoque. France's cultural supremacy was at its height. People were optimistic. It would have been a great time to have been here at the chateau. We're here in Purnon's salle à manger. People would have arrived for great events on the terrace outside in carriages, and grand dinners would have been held here in this room. We've uncovered these menus from 1911 and 1912, from great dinners held in this room. Look at all of the courses. But in the tragic phrase of the era, the lights were going out across Europe. And in 1914, war came to France and to the people living here at Purnon. The Marquis's eldest son, Pierre, served with the 8th Regiment of Cuirassiers and fought on the Western Front during the First World War. We found his name in this regimental history that we uncovered in the Chateau Library. Daniel de Roche-Query had saved Purnon, and he would die tragically on this Grand Escalier in April 1919. The chateau would pass to his eldest son, Pierre, and it would be in his care for the next 50 years.
Here we are right at the back of the domain in the potager, and behind me is Purnon's rare Aeolian boiler. It was constructed in 1900 to provide water to the vast potager and the chateau itself, and interestingly it was still working right up through the 1980s. Let's go up very carefully and have a look at the extraordinary view.
People often ask us what happened at Purnon during the Second World War. And for a long time, we believed that the chateau was largely untouched during those terrible years. And then recently, a family member contacted us and told us that in fact the Germans were here in the days immediately after the fall of France in June 1940. So imagine our amazement when in this secrétaire on the second floor we found these German newspapers. This first one with a photo of Adolf Hitler taking the French surrender in the carriage car at Compiègne. And then here, the Deutsche Allgemeine Zeitung, nach dem größten und letzten Schlacht, after the biggest and last battle. And here, General de Gaulle degradiert, General de Gaulle demoted. By then, of course, he was already in London. And here, the 26th of June, the Thüringer Allgemeine Zeitung, Der Krieg im Westen ist beendet. The war in the West is finished. And then underneath, Der glorreichste Sieg aller Zeiten, the most glorious victory of all time. And these newspapers sat, hidden in this secrétaire for more than 80 years. And by finding them, we can date exactly when the Germans were here at Purnon during that terrible time.
In 1969, Pierre de Rochequéry passed away and Purnon was inherited by his sons, Gilles, who became the new Marquis, and Jean-Pierre. It was during this period that Purnon received its first heritage protection, and these would later be extended to cover most of the domain.
By the 1990s, the chateau was again falling into disrepair. It had been over 100 years since the investments by Daniel de Rochequéry. This enormous building behind me, which houses Purnon's chapel, stables and tack rooms, had started to sink. And so this vast temporary structure was installed to try and stabilise the building. In 2013, the Marquis sadly passed away. And in a way, that's how Flick and I came to be here at Purnon. The family discussed keeping the chateau in the family's hands, but ultimately the decision was taken. The next stage in Purnon's history would involve a new family.
And that brings us to today and the enormous restoration project that's currently underway to save the chateau. These works will happen over several stages. Traditional construction techniques, carefully selected materials, and the latest technology combined to ensure that a chateau of elegance and beauty will be safe for future generations. And that's it, Purnon's history, from the eve of a revolution that would echo around the world to her restoration right now in the first decades of the 21st century.